And what is up, everyone? I'm Joe DeHoyos. I'm the host of Beyond the Woodline. And with me today, I have a guy. He's an author, an explorer, producer, an editor, reporter. He has his own show that he's the host of. It's called The Vortex. It's Mr. Daniel Allen Jones. How you doing, Daniel?
Hey Joe, great to be back. It's
Did you?
good to be here again. It's been
Yeah, man. Yeah,
an
yeah. Thanks a lot.
interesting year. So
Yeah,
hopefully you've been doing great. It's great to see you're still here with Beyond the Woodline. Awesome show. So yeah, it's awesome to be back.
yeah, man. Yeah, thank you for coming back. I really appreciate it. Did you wear a lot of hats? And you wear them well. And most people who wear them don't really wear them well, but you do, man. I really got to compliment you on that. You know,
Thanks, man. I try to keep things interesting, I guess, to say the least, but I enjoy being able to interact with a lot of the people I've connected with and networked with throughout the years in many of these different areas of interest. And I think that the little that I can do to maybe contribute to our understanding overall, I'll do what I can. And so that's something that, like you mentioned, the host and producer of for the Vortex. We cover all kinds of different topics and things that similar to what you discuss here with your guests as well. Get into things like cryptozoology and of course beyond. So that's something that we enjoy, really focusing on with just talking about the subject matter of UFOs or ufology or ancient mysteries and anomalous archaeology and what the government might know about some of these things. And so I'm interested in all these different studies and what we can understand and of course the scientific approach and maybe what we understand culturally in different groups and communities as well. So I'd like to see how maybe we can work in different ways to better our understanding with some of these strange issues, extraordinary phenomena and all of these types of things. So it's been really pretty eye-opening to connect with some of these people. And it's something that, I think provides some perspective on what's going on, not just from experiencers or people who feel like maybe they've had an incredible experience or encounter, but also what we're seeing coming from the military and the government and an official stance on this issue as well, and whether people are for or opposed, to that. So it's an interesting mix of things, and so I think that with what's happening now, there's a lot going on, and people should just keep their minds open to the possibility that I think that there are a lot of surprises on the way, and we can have our worlds change very quickly. So let's see what happens, and I'm ready to get into whatever you'd like to open the discussion up to, Joe. So what do you think?
well, yeah. You mentioned the government and the military in regards to UFOs or UAPs. Now, I guess is a popular term now that they're using. What do you think the government isn't telling us?
Right now, that's a incredible, thought-provoking question. I think there's a lot to what isn't known, what's not going to be publicly revealed, of course, and what's kept concealed behind closed doors, and maybe what has been in a situation like that for many years, decades, maybe. And so this is it's pretty interesting. It's kind of exciting to wonder that there could be a possibility of us finding out some of those things, but it's one of those issues that could be shrouded in secrecy forever, and some things we may never really get a clear picture on. I know a lot of people really like the idea of disclosure and full disclosure, and maybe how that can affect our understanding for all of humanity and all of these great things. I think it's sort of altruistic. It's a nice idea. It doesn't seem very practical in the sense of the government, coming out and just revealing everything they know, and not only that, but also what it means for us and sort of the issues that coincide with a lot of this, the associative things with UAP or UFO type of experiences, because it's not just seeing things. It's not just people seeing objects in the sky. You have a lot of other types of qualities that show that this is something that's psychological. It's physiological. There are implications beyond just people seeing strange objects, out in the air or something to that effect. So it's important to see that maybe with what we're learning about through experiencers, contactees, abductees, things like this, that what the government really is dealing with is far beyond just unknown aerial objects and things that maybe are being talked about and discussed openly now, but imply something maybe beyond that, maybe to the effect of, yes, abductions are happening and they know a great deal. They may know more than people that have been following along with this research for years and years, but it's something that might not just be thrown out there. So it's what we have to consider is that there are things being revealed to us, but it might not necessarily be all out in the open. And that's where I think people get disappointed that there's not a full disclosure, that we're just getting little things at a time. Now, what's interesting, what you had mentioned is that you have a lot happening now, that the government has come forward in some ways with the UAP topic. And that's sort of the nomenclature used to describe UFOs from military and government's unidentified aerial phenomenon. And not only that, you have a lot of other terms and groups and different things that have been implied through documentation and official legislation. That's actually something that's in effect right away. As of just the other day, there's a lot going on. It's actually pretty interesting to see. Now, whether you're an advocate for it or not, I think we should keep our eyes open and our minds open to the possibility that this is going to mean something for us when these things really are kicked into high gear with actually what's just been revealed or announced. And what I mean by that is, if you rewind a little bit, about half a year ago, back in June, and a half year before that, this was hyped up all up until June of this year. There was a big reveal or announcement, or what was supposed to be to the effect of a plan in Congress to basically look at finding a way to make sense of the UAP issue in an official capacity that provides transparency. And I've got a few things here I want to make mention of, because I think this is pretty important. So I actually have the preliminary report here. It's called the Preliminary Assessment of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, and it came out on the 25th of this year, of June, 25th of June anyway. And it's from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. This is something that everyone in Congress was briefed on. They had a classified version. This was the public unclassified version. Apparently the classified version was much more extensive, but it's not very long. The one we all were able to get is only about 9 pages, and there's some interesting terminology in there that basically is looking at establishing a permanent office or agency or body that they can utilize, that they're going to try to pull information and reports, case files, all of these types of things from all the different alphabet agencies, because they're all compartmentalized. And this has provided a challenge for people involved with this subject from the beginning of any type of research, really. They go back to Project Blue Book and the 50s, and in the 60s, you see this isn't a challenge that Dr. J. Allen Hynek had working with the Air Force. He was someone that basically was going through and trying to work with the Air Force to find answers to UFOs.
The mic's cutting off a little bit.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of static. Is it in the jack right?
Make sure.
Yeah,
how's this? Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, it sounds better, yeah.
Well, I'll do what I can. But yeah, the Project Blue Book was decades ago, and now what we're seeing is that there have been going on for quite a while. Are you still able to hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up. I don't know. I guess the Men in Black don't want you talking about that stuff.
It could be. I might switch over. I'm on a. Let's see if I got my mic here. If anything, I can switch out to my regular mic if I need to. But anyway, so what we're seeing now is a conglomerate of efforts made by these departments, these agencies, to work together to provide more information in a group that focuses on studying UAP. And so it's something that you can see, is not going to be an easy, sudden change, because still groups and divisions in the military, like the Air Force, might not be willing to cooperate as much as other groups like the Navy, which is really kind of where this newer group in Congress called the UAP Task Force originated, is that you have some of these things happening in an attempt to provide more legislation, transparency, and public openness and awareness on this issue. That doesn't mean we're going to find out everything. It's something that I think a lot of people are hopeful for. But what has happened in more recent times is that this is something I'd like to share as well, because this is an important article, and a lot of these are already posted. And anyone listening, feel free to check this out, or you can go back and get with me afterward. But this is an article that came out. It's Senator Gillibrand, who was recently just announcing this. Actually, it says the inclusion of her unidentified aerial phenomenon amendment, and this is something that goes through national security. And basically, what they're looking to do is establish an office that would replace the UAP task force and have access to all the intelligence community data related to UAP. And they would have the authority to establish coordinated efforts to report and share data with other agencies, and talk about experiences with UAP events. And this is something that's really just happened in the last month or so. And they say that the office will be administered jointly between the Secretary of Defense and the National Director of Intelligence. And they will empower military and civilian personnel working for the DoD and intelligence community. Intelligence community can mean a lot of things. So, and this is all involving Congress. Gillibrand's a senator. The supposed amendment to the funding was just passed through the enormous defense bill that was just given the green light by Biden just within the last few days. So this is all happening. This is all going into effect next year. There will be an official, not just a secret one that's probably been going on this whole time, maybe several, not just that, that's just probably something that could be happening. Aside from all of that, whether people find this significant or not, this is historic, because, Blue Book couldn't really accomplish this and to this effect. And so what we're seeing now is that there will be an official group that does have its own agency within the DoD and intelligence communities, to which this phenomenon will be looked into. Now, if you look back at one that we found out about a few years back called Atip, this is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. This wasn't open to the public. This wasn't something that people just generally knew about because they, unclassified it or something. It had to be revealed to us many years later of its inception. Now we're finding out for the first time that we are being told, yes, this is going to affect. It sort of was slipped into this spending bill, but as a part of a much larger apparatus of military defense spending. And it's something that is looked at in that way, because that's how the government and military operates. And they need to allocate funding to specific things. And so it's surprising to see, what kind of resources this program might receive, whereas something like ATIP only got, I think it was something like $22 million in funding, which is pocket change when it comes to government and military spending. So there could be a lot more opportunities for resources to look into UAP events that are not only currently happening, but have happened already, have been documented for, not even just the last few years, but for decades, and historic cases as well. So this is why I think it's important that we pay attention to what's currently going on with the issue regarding Senator Gillibrand, and a few other key players that we've seen helping push this in the official capacity would be Christopher Mellon and Luis Elizondo, who are both now part of a new program called, it's their involvement isn't necessarily from the government side of things, but they're part of Avi Loeb's new Galileo project. Avi Loeb is a professor at Harvard for astronomy and has actually been the one who's a proponent of the Oumuamua object, the interstellar object that came in to our solar system. This sort of idea maybe was not really looked upon very seriously by other scientists and cosmologists and astronomers, but he seems to think, this is Avi Loeb, he seems to think that this could be indication of non-human intelligence. And I would also recommend that, along with the preliminary assessment came out half a year ago, and we're seeing the effects of that now. And so just was going to make mention, I'm a big fan of literature, of course, so I have several books of many different topics, but this is one that came out as well this year called Extraterrestrial by Avi Loeb, and he has now the Galileo project which is an attempt at really making sense of the not just the UAP and UFO issue, but how we can understand non-human intelligence in the form of extraterrestrial or maybe something beyond, and its capacity to interact with us. And so there's a lot to that. We see programs like that going on already in different ways, different capacities, like NASA's SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. This is something that has been going on for a long time, but what the Galileo project is doing is a little bit different in their approach. And so I would definitely recommend checking out Extraterrestrial by Avi Loeb. It's something that I think would be informative. And I think it's what we can see maybe gives us an idea about all of these things that we've had happen just in the last year, not just in the last 5 years now or so. But they've really been amplified to the effect that there are official things happening that are being revealed, or not just revealed, but being openly discussed, openly put into the public through the media and through the government's more transparent approach to this, which I think either way, whether you think that's a good or bad thing, we have to pay attention to, because there are people, and like you've said, there are people who have many different perspectives on this, and there are things that we should, I think, keep in mind either way. But it is one of those issues that challenges us to see how this will affect us in our understanding culturally, not just individually, because, for people who are listening to shows like this and who are part of these communities, that's one thing. But for the everyday person who doesn't have anything to do with any of this stuff, who otherwise is indifferent, unfamiliar, or is just not really able to take the time and ability to look into these things, they're waiting for authority to explain to them what's going on or give them the updates or news. And that really comes down to the government's, religious establishments, schools, and the media. And I think those are strong pillars of our society as a whole, outside of the more fringe, so-called fringe areas of community that really talks about this stuff openly. Now it's been, cross-contaminated, so to speak, with like the mainstream public. And now this is sort of infecting their minds, planting the seed in their minds to think about how this is going to affect the base of population, rather than just the people who've been looking into so-called UFOs, for however long. So we should pay attention to what's happening, because there's a lot going down here in the next several months and into the next year that's going to give us some things. And some of those tangents off of this will include, again, not just UAP. UAP is synonymous with UFO. Things in the sky, that's interesting. We should be curious about that. But it has implications, and there are other issues that tangent off from this. A few things would be the analyzation of crash debris, of alleged crash cases. A few articles have been circulating about that whole process and looking into what are called metamaterials. And not to mention how maybe the issues of the abduction scenario have played into this, and all the other facets of interactions with entities and encounters, things to that effect, and how that all has been looked at for many years, but has sort of been set apart from some of the more straightforward approaches in this topic. And I think that it's important to see that maybe they're included in this official attempt at making sense of the UFO and other associated phenomena issue.
So do you think in our lifetime the government will actually come out and say something like, okay, Roswell, it really was a spacecraft that crashed there? I mean, at this point in time, it's like, you got to be crazy not to think that it's not a crash, right?
That's a good point. I think that with as many times as the government had actually come forward over the years with an official story, every single one, which there are at least 4 official stories for Roswell, and every single one, it has seemed to not really be very substantial. And it's kind of eye-opening to those who've been following along specifically with the Roswell issue, and that case specifically over the years. Some people come to mind would be basically you have a lot of these different researchers who have debunked the explanation in some way that I think is important to see how there's an official explanation that seems to coordinate with other historical instances, like the use of crash dummy type figures that was said to have been part of an experiment, and that's written away. The interesting thing is right up the road from where I am is where they apparently took the crash debris in Fort Worth, Texas, back in '47. They took it over to the Army Airfield, and that's where those famous pictures of Jesse Marcel and them holding up that would look like tinfoil. That's where that occurred, and the rest apparently was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force and base in Dayton, Ohio. Whatever it seemed to have been, and some people suggest that maybe there were bodies as well. Those are just many different angles to what people suspect happened, and at the same time, there are many different explanations or proposed explanations that describe nothing of the sort, and that it had nothing to do with a sort of extraterrestrial spaceship at all, and that it actually had much more to do with other things that were either conventional or still very covert, but in no way alien. And so there are a lot of different ways to look at the Roswell case that are just very ambiguous. And the challenge is that the city, of course, has embraced the alien theme, and it's sort of turned into a tourist attraction, and that can be fun. But how does that appeal to the historical validity and all of those other things? Those are questions that we have to see how, if, as you said, if ever they were to come forward and say, yes, it absolutely was, or for sure it wasn't, I think you would still have people who would be in great disagreement simply because of the adversity to government in general. Even with things happening right now, there was a MIDI report on a few articles that was talking about how NASA had hired some theologians, like priests, to examine the possibility or the effects of revealing an alien presence to humanity and people of faith, and how that would affect their life and their worldview, and how that might be a challenge for them to adapt that new information, or it would be something maybe they would be adverse to. So I think either way, seeing that and seeing how people are already adverse to government, it's something that we'll always find people won't agree with. Even if they came out and said, you know what, guys, sorry for lying for nearly 75 years now. Next year will be the 75th anniversary, and so it's one of those things that I think people would always find something to pick away at and say, you know what, it can't be true, and have already made up
because the
their mind.
government has been known to put out misinformation, to kind of throw people off. They still do that, in my opinion, they still do that to this day. So you really trust them.
I think that there are reasons to be very wary and to question authority. My good buddy Jim Mars, he had always said that was one of his sort of punchlines, was always question authority. I think that it's a really important part of what we're seeing now, because, and I'd say this because people can get the impression that maybe I'm advocating for all of this official stance, and I think that even if I was, it would make the difference that it's going to have a greater effect on the total population than any UFO conference. And I think we'd be naive to suggest that it's just going to happen through a grassroots movement. And as much as I think that's still going to happen, and we should all still do what we can ourselves to make sense of, contributing, I think that it's important to see that the majority of people will not be affected as much by that, which has already been happening this whole time. I've been to several conferences. I've met several people who've been doing this much longer than I have, who have made a difference, but have also realized that there has to be a shift beyond the people already into this stuff. And not to just sing to the choir, preach to the choir per se, but also see what we can do to touch the base of the population and instill an elevated understanding in a way that's non-threatening, non-invasive, but not to also come across as deceiving. Because again, anytime this touches upon government or academia or, science, the whole idea of like science as an established unified body, which it really isn't, and all of these ideas that, whether it comes from church, religion, all of this stuff, there will always be people who will be adverse to an idea being perpetrated by any one of those pillars. Like anything that comes on the news, it's automatically fake news to somebody, even that could just be a local story. It's like people are already going to make sense in their mind about what is real, what is proof, what is evidence, what is a actual experience, because I think it's all subjective, and it's important to consider that we experience that reality through our own lenses of perception. And to me, it's all important in our research to see how this is affecting us. So to get to my point in saying, not necessarily advocating for some of these things, but I'm not naive to think that we shouldn't just completely discredit or don't pay attention to it either. And I would say that anyone should, because it should make anyone curious to see that this is all happening. NASA's hiring priests to prepare humans for alien contact. The government's announcing the UFO programs to investigate and to look into. We have experiencers who are describing encounters with entities in many different capacities of the spectrum of good to bad. And then you have all of these other things going on. And I think a really great encapsulation of that is penned in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which is another great reference for everything happening. Just came out. It's co-authored by James Lukatsky, Colm Kelleher, and George Knapp. Most people would probably know George Knapp because of his involvement with Coast to Coast AM. He's a news reporter for Las Vegas's news station, and he's touched upon all of these different topics. And he's pretty much the one who broke the story about Area 51. That's why people know about it, is because of George Knapp. And so he's been at this for a long time, doing a lot like what we're doing, talking with people, interviewing guests, and researching this from a reporter and media stance that helps provide sort of a neutral point to where people can research further. This book really is helpful to see where this has gone under secrecy for the last several decades, and with a lot of the programs that have been going on, and people like Robert Bigelow and the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, and all of the different investigations and research they did, not just into UFOs, but to the paranormal and things that are sort of outside the scope of just physical objects being seen in the sky, and looking into Skinwalker Ranch and all of these things for a long time. This is something I think that is an eye-opening aspect to this whole phenomenon that people are being opened up to now more than ever. Because people like you and I and everyone listening, we've been kind of learning about a lot of these things for a while in a way that it kind of comes with the nature, it comes with the territory. You think of UFOs, and people through pop culture are automatically subjected to picturing alien spaceship and abductions and all these probing. It's been embedded within our pop culture forever now, and all of those things, and social media has made it a meme on like every level. And so it's something that I think has already been sublimated to us in a way that it's going to affect our understanding, rather than if we were totally like without a base of point of reference, So it's really important to see how that plays into all of the issues regarding UFOs. But at the same time, we shouldn't immediately associate the two, because they're both very ambiguous, non-descriptive issues that we have to make sense of case by case. It's a case-by-case basis. We can't throw every UFO under the same umbrella and say it was this, or every interaction with an entity experience that's reported as this. There are a lot of reports that have been done to show certain experiences are seen as positive, and some are seen as negative, and some are seen in various extremities. And it's important to consider that there is valid research attempting to be done on this. And I think that with the government's resources, they'll probably have the best opportunity. Let's hope they don't mess it up. I think that they will pull from civilian agencies. We know that groups like MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, have worked with, and that's revealed in this book and in others, by the way. I'd say another one, a really great resource just came out is Trinity. Trinity is about a crash case in New Mexico, similar to Roswell. And it's one of those that really, I think you have to consider. It's very close to Socorro. Socorro was another well-known UFO crash or landing case, rather, not crash case, but not too far in a place called San Antonio, New Mexico. And Jacques Vallée, along with Paula Harris, authored Trinity, The Best Kept Secret. And there's a lot of really great stuff in here. Vallée documents several other crash cases and looks at not just the crash cases, but the retrieved or acquired debris or materials from those cases that have been analyzed and in the lab. And that kind of brings us to the point of some of the things being analyzed now by a professor at Stanford named Gary Nolan. This is another great article that I think is worth mentioning, because it says, he's a professor of microbiology and pathology at Stanford, and he has done a lot of research in many fields, but he's analyzing the materials from unidentified aerial phenomena, which, as we were saying, is UAP. And there are a lot of articles that have sort of spun this into a captivating headline. But Gary's he's a no nonsense guy. He's not really looking at this from the UFO angle so much as it is just figure out what the chemical compositions, the alloys, and the different structures that we can glean scientifically, and if they are something that's naturally formed in these areas or not, or whether they're terrestrial or not, or whatever we can actually find out can be measured to some effect. And our ability to do that is always developed through, I think, defining experiments that we have like this. And I got to talk with Valet because and I met with him last month, actually. And I think it's important to see that he's been at this for a long time. He's personally worked with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was part of Blue Book, and I think it's great to see his involvement has left a legacy, and Valet is still working with that approach that has now grown into a huge community effort of people in all of these different disciplines who are looking at analyzing data in every form to understand the aerial phenomena that is anomalous, to understand the residual effects of physiological effects of victims, of people who have witnessed, and not just that, but have been affected by that entity encounters, and all of these things, the analyzation of materials. There are a lot of different facets to this. That's a multidisciplinary apparatus of individuals working to understand this. So it's not just, and this is to my point earlier in the discussion, it's not just about seeing objects in the sky. There are greater anthropological implications. That's where my interest comes in, and I think it's important to follow along as much of these different tangents or spokes to this wheel of ufology as we can. And so that's something that I've noticed has really just gone into overdrive this year, and we're in store probably for quite a bit in the coming year.
Yeah, that's good. That's a lot of good information. And I love that you got a lot of good references there too. So I appreciate all those books that you showed too. So I hope people can pick some of those books up and learn a little bit more about the subject. So have you yourself talked to any abductees?
Yeah, the way I think is important, and one of the approaches I take as an investigative reporter or journalist is, when I interview people of different backgrounds, that does include those who claim to have had experiences that would either describe themselves or have been described as not just UFO witnesses, but abductees, contactees, or experiencers. And there's a difference in all of those things, because sometimes people aren't intentionally meaning to have an experience. Sometimes people do have that intention, and sometimes people are indifferent and have to find out if it was meaningful for them in different ways, whether positive or negative, or however, if it affected them health-wise, or if there's something that they've noticed. And so I've been fortunate to connect with several. I think the most notable ones would be probably the big three, and I don't want to just say that everyone else isn't relevant, but three that stand out immediately would be Terry Lovelace, who I've got to meet and work with over the last 2 years, and he's in the Dallas area, which is why I know him now, who's had ongoing experiences. He had an incident that he wrote about, actually, in a book called Incident at Devil's Den. This was in 1977 in Arkansas, at a park, where he and a buddy of his were taken, and what seemed to be, they had sighting first. So this is one of the other issues I want to make it clear when I wrap this up. This is an important part that is a correlation in every single one of these three cases. They saw an object. In Terry's case, it was an enormous triangular prism object that was what he described as like at least 5 blocks long, 3 blocks tall, enormous. And they had an experience, and they encountered beings, and it was not a good experience. And later on, he felt he was a military abductee, or even to the effect of being followed or monitored and tracked by helicopters, and which we discussed as well. So that was Terry. His initial experience, which he didn't share about for years up until more recently, was in 77. And then going back from there, we had Travis Walton. Travis Walton is the subject who appears in the movie Fire in the Sky, and he, along with several other loggers, which he was a part of, he's a logger in Arizona near Snowflake. So they apparently see this, what they described as a fire in the sky, which was an object, luminous. And Travis got out of the truck and ran up, and as the story goes, he was struck by an arc of light, like a beam, like lightning almost, and it knocked him back. And they took off because they thought they were terrified apparently, but they just thought he had died. They came back and he was gone. So the story goes, and so they apparently wanted. Maybe not wanted. I shouldn't say that. They were considered that it was a homicide case, so they were all suspects of murder. For about 5 days until he came back, and he tells the story of what happened to him that no one else really got to experience but himself, which was he was aboard an object. He was on a medical table, witnesses 3 small gray entities, and in a frantic flurry just gets up and is almost in a brawl with them, and just kind of runs out, goes into another room, to which he sees another person, like a humanoid, looks like he thought a person, military uniform, who notions him to come into another room, and they put him back on a table, and he goes back under, and he just, later on, he appears on the ground and says he sees the object flying away or however, and he goes to the phone booth and calls his brother, and it was 5 days later. And again, all of that's portrayed in a really, highly dramatized version in Fire in the Sky. It's a movie in the 80s, right?
Right.
And that was in 75. And then go back 2 years prior to that, in 73, in Pascagoula, Mississippi, you had 2 guys out fishing and a boat, and out in this area where they saw this object come down. And again, they had these strange entities come over and take them aboard the object, to which there was another entity inside, which he describes as a female. This is Calvin Parker. So this is a really weird, I think, connection between 3 cases. And let's say, okay, I think that we have to be careful and just all the different things out there. A lot of information, there's a lot of rhetoric. I think these guys seem sincere, but I don't know that it all actually happened. I think that it's some people are pretty confident that they're all telling the truth, and it's your absolute lots of really interesting anecdotes to a true story that might some of these details be real, some of them not be real. They could outright all be completely fabricated. I think that it's important to consider as someone who looks into this, is that I have to be careful not to just believe any of these people just because it sounds nice or it sounds amazing. But at the same time, I do find some things more convincing than others. The challenge is that I don't know. I wasn't there. So I don't want to just wholeheartedly believe that it did happen, because even though all 3 of these cases, these people saw objects, they not only encountered the objects, they encountered entities. Not only that, the entities interacted with them, took them, and did some kind of medical procedure on them. Every single one of these people. And that's just 3 big ones that people probably know about. There are other people that I've interacted with, and others who do the research to look into these contactees as well, that I think really is important, worth mentioning. One of them would be Mary Rodwell, who is an author, but also is a co-founder to a group called FREE, which is an acronym. FREE is the Foundation of Research into Extraordinary and Extraterrestrial Experiences, who Edgar Mitchell helped found as well. Edgar Mitchell was an Apollo astronaut. He was a huge proponent of this. They did this study, a medical study, to see for about 4,000 people what their experiences were like interacting with non-human entities. And the statistical consistency was that it was positive, and not negative. That wasn't everyone, but that was sort of that study. And so on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who look into this and say, these are demons. It's all deception. It's all evil. It's totally demonic. Don't want anything to do with it. And there are even people in the government who are of that persuasion and actually find that that's something that has been used against the openness approach to this, because they don't want this to be something that is really even touched upon. There are a lot of sensitive things that I think this gets into when you're getting into something beyond just physical objects or whatever people are seeing, aerial phenomenon, right? I think it's something beyond that, to the effect of what are people experiencing? What are people encountering? And what, if any at all, of these are actually true? Because I think we have to at least consider the possibility that even if 99% of every single one of these extremely compelling stories are absolutely fake, that still leaves some percentage of them being
Right.
real. Even statistically, I think that we have to consider, with everything that we're learning about space and the universe and the Drake equation, which is the probability of intelligent life in the universe. This is increasingly exponential number. Um, we start to make a little bit more of an observation of that probability increasing, and I think that it's so important that we handle this in a way that helps turn the base of the population in a very careful way, so as to not flip it over and have mass hysteria, chaos, anarchy, and something that's going to not be a good revolution for us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever that is. I think it's important that we handle this carefully, and that's always going to be a challenge because not everyone's going to get along. So I think
Right.
that that's an important part of this. It's something that the media is touching on more and more, but we have to realize that there are a lot of people who will never be open to this, or that they feel like they have already believed or felt they have an experience that they know what it is, and they're set, and their understanding is they can't be convinced otherwise. And so it's not as much about what's going on. I think sometimes, even though that's interesting. So as an example, to me, the phenomenon is interesting, but maybe even as much is the people involved with this research, the community, the experiencers, the government aspect of this. To me, I think studying that and our understanding of it is equally as important. We have to consider our own reaction, not just as even just enthusiasts who watch the shows, but as people who otherwise don't know anything about this, who aren't looking into the latest UFO, news or shows or podcasts or anything like that. Right, they're totally oblivious, and we have to think about those groups of people in a way that this will be affecting them probably more than anyone else. You could tell anyone else, say, hey, the government says UFOs are real. That's one thing. We've gotten to that point. But beyond that, yeah, this case, Roswell, this and that, or whatever other cases, and then alien abductions, yep, that's in there too, and all of these things, and all these other challenges to science that are now being opened up as a real opportunity to not be ridiculed about. And that's, again, another thing that, like, Avi Loeb over at Harvard is helping to do. He's getting a lot of big names on board to help make this more accessible and more feasible for credentialed scientists who are deserving of the ability to look into this without being ridiculed. I think the opportunity that has never been allotted to anyone like this before, without just being totally thrown out as crazy or just total junk science. So it's important that we see how we can use this as a way to help generate more interest and, again, elevate the base of awareness for the majority of the population.
What was the case here in Texas where the people were driving down the street? I think they saw the light. They wound up getting like second-degree burns, and then they wound up getting radiation poisoning, and they wound up suing the Air Force because the Air Force says no, it was us. And it was a Cottage Grove or something like that.
So you were describing is what's known as the Cash Landrum
The
incident,
Cash Land,
and
there you
those
go.
are the last names of the two ladies that were involved and one of their grandsons. You have Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum and her grandson Colby Landrum, and this happened north of Houston
Right.
in 1980, in December of 1980. Actually, tomorrow, as
Oh
crazy as that
wow,
is,
that's so
like here
good.
in a few hours.
Yeah,
So it's not a happy anniversary. It
right,
actually is a very tragic. It's probably one of the most tragic UFO cases
right,
because they didn't just see an object, and it wasn't just an object. It was one anomalous object, or something that was not conventional. If not anything else, it was not a conventionally known object. And then not only that, it was surrounded by about 24 black double rotor Chinook
right,
helicopters.
right,
Almost anyone would probably never see that many helicopters at one place ever in their life, unless of an incident like this, a military um, procedure, or some kind of air show. And even then, even a dozen helicopters. When are you going to see that many, right? So this was a very descriptive account where they got out of their car because it stopped. The object seemed to like disable their vehicle. And the diamond-shaped object that was glowing was sputtering, emitting fire or flames or just light down onto the road. They couldn't pass. They got out of their vehicle, and these two ladies felt an immense heat. One of them pressed their hand into the dash, and it imprinted their hand. And they came finally. The whole envoy left. Whether they were escorting it, trying to retrieve it, or whatever else. We don't really know. I think there have been some proposed explanations by certain people that I've heard from, but nothing has been officially explained about that. And they never really, unfortunately, they actually did suffer a lot of things. They came the next day, with burns and blisters and hair falling out, sick, throwing up, obvious signs of really bad radiation. But they never really suspected alien at all. That was never a thought in their mind that this must be aliens. They immediately thought it was government. But think of how their reaction would have changed if they had only seen the diamond-shaped object and not any of the helicopters, right? That would have, I think, altered their experience. So the associative description or detail of the helicopters, I think, afforded them a different perspective about the whole thing. Maybe it was alien. I don't know. I don't really think we have a way to determine that without just speculating. The really bizarre thing about that whole thing, the crash landing incident in 1980, December 29th, 1980, right? The same time, half a world away, over in Suffolk, England, in the Rendlesham Forest, you have a strange object land, and occurs near the Royal Air Force Base, which American military personnel came out onto the location, into the forest, encountered the object. One person even touched it, and they apparently succumbed to physiological effects as well at the same exact time. That's pretty bizarre, I think. Granted that that's all true, and I think that there are some reasons to suspect that it could very well be some of the most tangible things that we can find out, because these are highly researched and documented cases, even from the government. And I think that it's important to see that, while not to say that everyone else that describes UFO is not credible or did not believe them, but we should question some of these cases just out of the sincerity for not, and I don't want to say that it's not about disbelieving people, because I think people can have an incredible story. I've known Travis Walton for years now, and he's an incredible guy. He's really nice. He's a great guy. Do I really think that he did that? I don't know. I think maybe it sounds like he had something happen. Is he telling the absolute truth? I don't know. I'd like to think he is, but he could be totally making the whole thing up and lying. As crazy as that sounds, and not to be disloyal or anything like that or disrespectful, we have to consider that that's the possibility, is that a lot of the things that we hear floating around and ufological lore could outright be fake and total lies, and that at least some of it absolutely is, whether it's done by people who are just trying to make a story or just muddy the water, or it's done by government to disinform us, like you said earlier, which absolutely we know does happen. We have to think about how this is affecting us in different ways, and how it's actually discrediting some of the more credible reports, like the Cash Lendrum incident, in which people do have physiological effects of. That is a really tragic episode, and I think that has probably happened to a few people. We just happen to know about that case. And we only know about cases because they're reported. So we can only imagine the number of instances, encounters, experiences that were never reported and may never be, or have documentation. So the flip side to that is to maybe consider the possibility that the government does have a lot of documentation about all of these types of things that has never been revealed. And as to your point earlier, maybe at some point that'll come out from behind closed doors and revealed to the world for the better. And I hope that maybe it can. I don't know if it's how that's going to work. I'd like to think that we can keep putting pressure on that to happen, and do the best we can to, work toward our own understandings. But we shouldn't wait for an answer. I think that that's the challenge, is that a lot of people that's going to happen either way. In some form, people are going to have to wait to hear something. But I think that that's kind of where it is that it's hard to make sense of in any scenario. whether they just outright say it's all here is ETs and it's UFOs and they're taking people, so we can't do anything about it. But here it is. That would be bizarre. Some people would be satisfied, at least that they're acknowledging that, and other people would be So it's like, how do you handle what type of PR people are they going to get to really take care of this? And then you look back at this case where NASA's working with theologians to connect with the religious community, faith-based community. That seems indicative to me that there are already plans in place and efforts, sociological ones and anthropological ones, because again, this is not just about UFO sightings and what that means. It's a greater effect and impact on us as a culture, and our understanding as a community of this issue will have to be adapted. That change will come very easy, but I don't think it'll be an overnight type thing. So what we can do to work together as a community and not just doing what we can to research cases and things going on now, but to connect together through media, through what we're doing, like through Beyond Woodline or the Vortex or any number of outlets that provide this type of information. And also, hopefully, as conditions continue to improve, we can have more physical gatherings, conferences, events, things like that allow us to network together and see what we can do to generate more as a whole. Because I think that that's going to be something that will help with what we're doing, is to keep that going.
So, one thing I always ask the guests, especially when I had like someone who's on from paranormal or in the cryptid world, what do they recommend? Someone who wants to start researching, a lot of times get a recorder and a camera, get out in the woods and, do some research, or, you can do an EVP just about anywhere. Somebody wants to get into the researching UFOs, UAPs. How would you recommend they start doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that what we're seeing now is a big opening up to people who have never really looked into this before. It's connecting more people together, and people are curious. They're wanting to have a way to find out about this, and they might not be sure of really what to do, how to learn more about this. I think that, there are a lot of resources that are available. I pointed out a few books that I think would be great points of reference. And again, one is In Plain Sight by Ross Coulthart, who's also a journalist. It documents a lot of what's been going on with the government's approach, as well as Trinity, Best Kept Secret by Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and this other one, Extraterrestrial. These are, I think, probably, if not anything else, this subject can be seen as very lofty and not very grounded, and often riddled with conspiracy and speculation and paranoia. And I think that, yes, absolutely, that's actually a big part of it. Unfortunately, it's hard to make sense of those things. All of this stuff is very credentialed, and I think more credible and for someone looking for that, if you even consider it that at all. It's well put together, and I think it's something that the quality of work done in this area gives credence to for those who are trying to find out. And I don't really plug my own material a whole lot, but the only reason I will do so at this time is because a lot of the people I've talked to are good gateways to other more important information. And that's a lot of why I do what I do with the Vortex and my interviews and on-location segments and presentations, is because it helps people connect the dots. I don't tell people what to believe because this is how I see things or something like this, but it's more important about, as a reporter and journalist working in this sort of weird alternate fringe of media, is that we can bring it out of the fringe and into the forefront of the mainstream by integrating these ideas that are practical. So I like to sit down and talk to the person that I'm interviewing in a way that's more personable and relatable, because we're actually there together. And so I just make it very much like a dialogue, like an informal conversation, just like we're having here. And so what we can do is, I think, help connect the dots through talking with the people who've been doing this for a long time, who haven't had involvement, who have had experiences. So you can see a lot of the things that I've done like that in my interview videos on the YouTube channel, The Vortex, and that's connected all on my pages as well. So I've been fortunate to be able to work closely with a lot of great people, and thanks to really Jim Mars, who set me off on this path, because he was a really profound investigative journalist who had integrity, who had to try to make sense of really challenging issues. And I think that it impressed upon me something that I try to do a little bit of in my own work. So check out some of those interviews, because I think they'll at least give a springboard into a lot of other important aspects of things like UFOs. But as you said earlier, Joe, and as some of the things you do as well, it's not just about UFOs. I really enjoy all aspects of like the unexplained. So we look into cryptozoology, we look into things like Bigfoot. And I'll just give a shout out here, because I don't know if you can see above me, I've got a little frame of Patty up there from the, of course, Patterson Gimlin film of 1967. I was able to go out there to Bluff Creek in Northern California and meet up with the Bluff Creek Project. Awesome guys. Notably, I would like to give a shout out to Rob Leiterman and all of the Bluff Creek Project for this new book they just came out with. I want to say that this is definitely worth checking out. It is a tome. It's definitely something that I think has been a historical work. And I think that, again, it's interesting to see all of these different subjects and why I think they're important to us culturally, scientifically, and all of these great things, because there's still a lot we can learn from. And when it comes to other areas, I do what I can to kind of find out more. And with the videos I do, it's basically to connect people with other information and resources. So I'd be glad to be able to continue the discussion anytime, Joe. It's always been great to be able to like see how this makes us wonder what's going on and what little we can do to, work together. I'm glad to be a part of. So, it definitely checks out some of those things. And, for anyone that has any questions or information, I look forward to, connecting with you all too.
Yeah, man. Speaking of that, if someone had any questions for you or they wanted to contact you, how would they be able to do that?
Well, I'm on most social media accounts: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and email's fine too. It's just my name at hotmail.com. And the Vortex is on YouTube, and you can connect on there. I would say that if it's something you'd like to share personally, of course, feel free to email or send a message. I'm pretty accessible online. You can just search my full name and something will pop up. Because I think that what's really important is people have the ability to share things without people. And it's great to be able to connect with people. Some people have really incredible stories, but it's because of them, which I'd like to honor, because without people coming forward, we don't have a lot to work with. And it's because of their bravery and courageousness that I'm thankful, and I think many people are, to be able to have anything to study or to look into or to research, because without these reports or stories or eyewitness accounts, things like that, and people coming forward, there's not a lot that we can do. And it takes a lot, because think of all the things that never get shared and that we'll never know about because people never come forward. So at least that there are people who do that, and I do what I can to connect with them. And for those who I think are comfortable enough, I do interviews about their case or their story or their experience, just like you have here. And I think it's important that we continue doing this great work. So once again, Joe, it's you're doing an amazing job. It's great to see you throughout all these challenges, and you're able to keep at it as well. It's not easy, but very commendable. So I appreciate everything you're doing too.
Dude, I appreciate you so much, man. You're my 92nd episode, as a matter of fact. So I've been going
Awesome.
at it for a little bit, man. So I appreciate you coming on, man. You always do a great job. You always give great information, man. And I can't thank you enough. And I really appreciate everything that you do. So you always put out good stuff on Facebook too. So if you guys aren't following them, be sure to follow them, man. You're not going to go wrong. But with that being said, man, I really appreciate it, and I want everyone in the chat room to know that I appreciate you guys too, man. You guys always do a good job. And, you guys have a good night. Have a happy New Year, and Mr. Daniel, we'll see you in 2022, man.
We'll see you there.
Okay, thanks a lot again, buddy.